Created equal, this is true. Oh yeah, that's good and evil. Who are you? The sun, it shines on everyone. Yes, it does. There's a million stars. Reach for one every city.
Greetings. I'm Officer James, Urbana Police Department, and welcome to this edition of Cops Corner. Today, we're going to talk with Matthew Rivers with the Urbana Police Department. He's going to talk about tasers and the use of. So welcome, Matt.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So, okay, we're going to dive right on into it. So, as most of the public knows, the Urbana Police Department just recently acquired tasers, a certain amount of tasers for our department.
Correct.
How many do we have with our department?
I think we have 7 Taser officers right now, but I think only 6 of them are on the street or on patrol. So,
okay.
And those are divided up amongst the different shifts.
Okay. Was there a certain criteria that
yes.
we were supposed to have to be a taser carrying police officer?
Yes. So first of all, you have to be a crisis intervention team officer, and that by itself means 40 hours of specific training, just dealing with subjects who may be, involved in some sort of mental crisis or mental health crisis, or so that training is a prerequisite. And then of course there's the departmental training for the taser itself, and that's another 8 hours of training that you have to go through, and that's after being selected to be part of the unit, the Taser Officers. Part of that training includes being exposed to the taser. So every officer that you'll see in Urbana that carries a taser has been exposed to the taser as well.
So they know exactly how it feels,
yes.
what effects it has on
exactly.
the general body.
Yep.
And so they can be compassionate,
yes.
and empathetic about
And I think that's an outstanding idea. You go into it kind of having this one notion about what it's going to be like to use this tool, and then after having been exposed to it, you have a greater appreciation for what it can do, but also it helps you understand what the effects of it are, and will, I think, at least for me personally, makes me more judicious in how I might apply it.
Okay. So we're talking about tasers, and what do you actually do? What are you in the RAM? Are you an instructor? Or?
Yes, I'm one of the department's 2 taser instructors. And
okay.
so that meant for me going to an additional 2-day course down in Charleston to learn how to be a taser instructor. So when we have more officers, eventually if we get more tasers, I would be involved with instructing them and developing the training program as well, along with Lieutenant Searles.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about the tasers. I mean,
sure.
Of course, there's a bunch of different types of tasers that's out there. The dry stun, the wired, and right. so forth and so on. What do we carry? Well,
I'll pull it out here. So our taser is made by Taser International. I'm being careful not to point it at anybody here.
Absolutely.
Not that it would just go off by itself, but just to display it. So this is made by Taser International, and this model name is called the X2, and this is the most modern model that they make. Modern in the sense that it has a whole range of electronic elements to it, computerized. It's a very smart tool. Mm-hmm. So it measures all sorts of different things. Our tasers also have cameras, which are down here at the bottom.
Okay.
So this is the safety up here. It's not on right now, but if I were to turn it on, this camera would come on automatically.
Okay.
And our department policy states that anytime the taser comes out of the holster, so anytime I point it out, I'm supposed to turn on the camera. And that would mean that flip up the switch. So technically right now I'm violating department policy just by having it out, not having the safety on. But
you have no intention on using it.
No, I'm not
right
going to
now,
use it, of course.
Right.
So just in pulling it out, if I were out on the street and I was out on a call with somebody and I were to pull my taser out, I would be required to turn on the safety, which would activate the camera. The taser cannot be fired without the camera being on.
Okay.
And so when it were to be fired, it would record all sorts of information, things like the temperature, the date and time,
okay.
How long the cycle was when the taser is actually fired, things like that, and it will record these things, and then later on they can be evaluated.
So you said how long the cycle was.
Right.
When you speak about cycle on a taser for our audience, you're talking about how long you held the trigger, correct?
Actually, no.
Oh, okay,
so with our X2, one pull of the trigger mm-hmm. will discharge one set of probes. So
okay.
just to back up a little bit, the way the taser works is When the trigger for the taser is pulled, there are two barbs that will shoot out, and they will connect to the target or the person.
Right.
The way a taser works is what you're trying to achieve with the taser is something called neuromuscular incapacitation. The way that works is there's an electrical charge that is delivered through the taser's wires and in through the probes that will involuntarily cause incapacitation of the muscles. And so that's why if you've ever seen videos on the internet of the taser working, you'll see people just kind of lock up. That's their muscles locking up. And that's what happened to me when I was exposed to taser. I was hitting the top of the one leg and then in my back. And it just caused me to lock up like a board. That's what we're trying to achieve with the taser is that neuromuscular incapacitation. The reason that's so valuable for police officers is when we use force, we're trying to achieve compliance with people.
Absolutely.
So long as we're using a reasonable amount of force, either to control somebody who's aggressively trying to hurt somebody else, or if we're trying to effect an arrest, we are required by law to effect a reasonable amount of force. Unfortunately, as the level of force moves up that scale that we're bound to, when we're dealing with somebody who might be aggressive, somebody who's swinging a weapon like a club, or someone who may have a knife or something like that, you're talking about very high levels of use of force.
Absolutely.
So even up into deadly use of force, which would be using our pistols.
Right.
So unfortunately, when you use these higher levels of force, such as our pistols, or even that one step below that, which would be our expandable batons, you can do some real damage to people. One of the beautiful things about the taser is that you don't have that potential for extreme injury.
Right.
With our batons, if you swing your baton and connect with somebody, you have potential for broken bones or very serious, harmful injuries, which is pretty grievous. And of course, as long as we're justified in doing that, that's okay. But with the taser, after that 5 seconds is over and the charge stops being delivered, it's almost like you're back to being
normal.
Okay.
Just everything goes back to
Everything
normal.
just goes back to normal. Of course, you've got these small little barbs that are stuck in you, but the effects of the taser, it's almost like magic. It just goes right away. So that's one of the really nice things about it, is that you don't have that long-lasting effect of an injury, or you're not going. And when we do use the taser, we have a whole set of medical things that we go into after its use, but. And that includes things like having ambulance personnel respond and evaluate the people, just because there are some concerns about maybe heart rate being affected and things like that. So we want to be really careful when we use this, but again, the potential for really grievous injury is reduced by using a taser instead of something like a baton.
Now, how long have we had our tasers?
We got these in March of 2015, and during that time, in the 21 months since then, we've only used them once.
One time.
Just one incident, that's right. And that was, without going too much into it, was a subject who was having sort of a mental health crisis.
Right.
And that's something that we certainly wanted these for. One of the event that happened on Main Street in Urbana a couple of years ago, the subject with the knife who was cutting himself, that was the event that really kind of kick-started all of this. So that's where I really see the potential. And that's one of the things that I like the most about it, is that the reduced for injury.
Absolutely.
So both for officers and for people.
I was going to speak on that. Now, of course, as most people know, I'm injured from wrestling and fighting with somebody who didn't want to go and been down for a while now. Have we seen a decrease in actual officer hands-on with the officers that have the tasers?
It's hard to say, just because we haven't had a lot of incidents with it yet.
Right.
I think as of today, we've had 11 incidents where officers have pulled out their tasers and have pointed it at a subject. And the purpose for that is to gain compliance without having to use force. And with the exception of the one discharge that we had, all 10 of those events ended up with no use of force by the officer, which is great.
Absolutely.
Anytime where we don't have to use force and we can gain compliance from the people that we're dealing with is a good day for everybody.
Absolutely.
So I guess you could say that in those 10 incidents, we didn't have to use force. That's pretty good.
That's a decrease, right? I mean, a person, clearly they had to be drawn because the person didn't want to comply.
Right.
So since they didn't want to comply before we had tasers, our options were if we're close enough to use OC as a paying compliance type situation.
Right.
Go hands-on.
Right.
which, you know, the person wants to fight. They were non-compliant in the first place.
Right.
So why would they comply just because you put your hand on their wrist and their elbow?
Exactly.
And the other one, depending on how bad it is to draw the weapon.
Right.
So,
or the baton.
Or the baton. So we have another deterrent in between that seems to be pretty effective. I mean,
right.
I've heard the term "ride the lightning." You know,
right.
people out in the community, in the neighborhoods, they would say, "Oh man, you know, they got rode the lightning" when they watch the video, right? So people don't like to ride the lightning.
No, it's not something I want to do again.
Right. Even though it ends, you know, it has. In my opinion, I haven't been tased, right? Because I'm not a taser. It came after I got injured, so I wasn't able to go through that, but I would have if I could have, thankfully. Mm-hmm. From my experience, when I would OC someone, or when I was OC myself, my coworkers would get some effects of it. The people around that may not have had anything to do with it, because it splashes and it lasts a long
45
time.
minutes.
Right. So this, you discharge it. It has its desired effect.
Hopefully, yeah.
Hopefully, right, and then it's over. You may have some small pricks. Earlier you said you got needles stuck in you, but they're not really like in you, like you stuck with a knife.
It's
just
very
kind
small
of
amount,
attached,
just enough
right?
to hold it to your. So with the probes that come out,
Mm-hmm.
they need to achieve a connection with your body
Mm-hmm.
so that they can deliver that charge. And there's just enough of a barb on that probe to hold it in place. So it's not going into you like an inch or anything.
Right.
It's very small amount. And I also want to point out too, the way our policy is written on taser use, it's very restrictive, and I think that's a very good thing.
Right.
So in our levels of use of force, going from the top down, we have our deadly force, and then we have what we would call, I guess, level 4, which would be aggressive assailant.
Correct.
Level 3 might be somebody who's just, aggressively or actively resisting.
Right.
So for level 3, we can use things like OC spray,
Right.
control holds, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Other departments around the country will allow their officers to use tasers at that level. We can't at Urbana.
Okay.
So we can't use a taser until we're at level 4. And that's defined as somebody who's an aggressive assailant. So somebody who is actively trying to hurt somebody else. Whether it's an officer or themselves, correct. So a subject who's actively involved in maybe cutting their wrists, somebody who may have a knife to themselves, for example. That was one of our first taser displays. Or somebody who's aggressively trying to hurt somebody else. We have to be at that level of justified use of force before we can use our taser. Again, I think that's a good thing. If we were down to a lesser level, less restricted use of the taser, I think we may have had more incidents where it would have been used. Thankfully, that hasn't been the case.
Correct.
So that's a good thing. Talking again about pain compliance was the term that you just brought up. We talked a little bit about this. With the taser, it's involuntary. You can't fight through it.
Right.
Your body won't let you. So many of the other things that we do use, like the OC sprayer, control holds, or if you're engaged in a fight really with somebody, you're trying to control them, those techniques are based in pain compliance.
Right.
And when you have somebody who may be under the influence of a drug, or alcohol, or someone who's super strong, or adrenaline, people can fight through pain compliance. They have inordinate amount of strength that they can call on, and sometimes you have 2 or 3 officers fighting somebody where the taser can just take care of that. So we haven't had that happen in Urbana yet, but I think I can think of a couple examples just in my history here where we've had a subject who was under the influence of something and it took 4 or 5 officers to control them.
Right.
Whereas a taser, it's involuntary. If it makes connection with the body and it's able to make that charge, then you're going to achieve that NMI, that neuromuscular incapacitation.
Like, for instance, and I'm just throwing it out here because it hasn't happened since I've been on the street, of course.
Sure.
Like our excited delirium calls,
Yes.
right? Would this be a good place to use a taser, at least until we're able to get the 4 officers there to get them down? Because the excited delirium, from my understanding of it, the person is so worked up they're burning themselves out.
Yes.
They're going to keep going and keep going and keep going until their heart gives out.
Right.
And we don't want that. So the reason we have to go hands-on sometimes with our excited delirium is to restrain them and give them that shot of is it ketamine? Ketamine that they use now. Does a taser help with that, or can we use it in that circumstance?
It would. Excited delirium, of course, is a medical crisis.
Correct.
And one of the reasons that you see these deaths happen in excited delirium situations is because officers are trying to restrain them, and they're working so hard to try to resist that. Sometimes a taser can help, incapacitate that person for that 5 seconds. Now, I talked a little bit about it. When we pull the trigger on the taser, the way our tasers are regulated is one trigger pull, you get one set of probes, and the taser itself controls the duration of that cycle. It's exactly 5 seconds.
Okay.
I can't hold the trigger down any longer than that. It won't do it. It'll shut off.
Right, that's good. I'm glad you clarified that.
Now, with our model, we have two sets of probes. So you have the one shot, and then you have the potential for one more. So that would just be 2 5-second cycles that are available to you with the two sets of probes. They will not let you hold it down longer than 5 seconds with the trigger. So that's a really good thing too.
Right.
There have been situations in the past where different sets of taser, or different models of taser, people will hold down the trigger not even realizing that they're doing it,
Right.
Or they're abusing it. There's the potential for that too. The way this taser works, with it being a smart taser, with that smart technology, limits the potential for those sorts of things to happen. And of course, it will also record that, how long you've held down the trigger. Those are things that are available to us as we look at the workings of, or when we do that. So when we download the taser video, and periodically we have to do that because we have to test them, make sure they're working.
Right.
We can look at all of those logs. It keeps track of all of those things.
I want to touch on that. I want to ask one more question before I touched on the video and things of that nature. When you're, and it hasn't happened here in Urbana that I've seen, but on videos, people, the internet is the person's devil, right? So they want to read and listen to and watch everything that happens on the internet and take it as a Bible.
Right.
In some circumstances, when you see an officer or someone deploy the taser, pull the trigger, the barbs come out, they make somewhat of contact with a person, but it has no effect, so another person has to use theirs.
Right.
Is that because one of the barbs didn't connect well, or is it, why does that happen?
So you need both probes to make contact, to have good contact. One of the things you hear a lot about is how, man, tasers are 50,000 volts, and that person got hit with 50,000 volts. It doesn't really work that way with this taser. So, without getting too specific about the electricity, the electrical things, what the taser needs is a certain amount of charge to get to the person, to cross that gap. And so if you're connected through clothing, it might not be as good of a connection as, say, if it was through bare skin. So most people are wearing clothing when they would be hit with a taser. So the taser reads 16 times a second how good the connection is, and it evaluates how much charge it needs. So, and you can see this also in the logs, is when it recorded that good connection.
Right.
So when the taser evaluates that it has made a good connection with the person, it can scale down the amount of charge that's being delivered. So it won't be 50,000 volts. That might be what it needs to get through a couple layers of clothing to make contact with your skin so that it can achieve that NMI. But really, once it's gotten to the level where it's made a good connection, you're going to dial that all the way down to about 1,200 volts. And it's not all about voltage either. It's really about amps. A wall socket in your house, it's 110 volts, and people think, oh man, well that's 110, and a taser's 50,000. I mean, that's
insane, right? It sounds insane.
It sounds
right?
terrible, right? And you go, no, I wouldn't ever want any part of that. But it's really a much different thing. So your wall socket at the 110 volts, you've got 16 amps. A Christmas tree bulb on your Christmas tree lights has only got 1 amp, just that 1 amp of charge. With the taser, we're talking about 2 1,000ths of an amp. That's how much
That's
electrical.
even lower, right?
Oh, it's
Right.
extremely a lot lower. So again, Christmas tree bulb, 1 amp. Taser charge is 2 1,000ths of 1 amp.
Right.
So it's just a fraction. The difference being is that charge is being delivered 16 times a second. So that's why you have that 5 seconds. But it's not a continuous charge. It's
Right.
not like people are stepping on the third rail or something like that. That's just an extreme amount of
It's like your ABS brakes.
Right. Well, that's a good way to think of it, right?
They hit every time.
And you hear that sound that people hear with the taser. It's like,
Right.
that clacking noise. That's those individual charges. And in between each one of those, it's actually not delivering the charge. So, but it's still causing that effect, that muscle effect. So that's to make sure that you don't have any of those other health effects that could occur from a continuous charge of electricity. I mean, that would be crazy. So the Taser measures all of those things basically in real time and makes sure that it's not delivering too much charge. Old technology, 20, 30 years ago, they couldn't regulate that the way they can now. And now the technology is good enough so that they can make sure that we're getting the desired result without causing long-lasting damage.
Matt, I have to say, I learned a lot today. You know, even though I thought I learned, you know, I read because I had to read the Taser Policy and as part of the department training. Going into the video real quick before we conclude here, when we draw them and if we have to use it, isn't that reviewed by our use of force panel, or is it just the sergeants, or how?
No, there's a whole, and this is one of the good things that they came up with as they developed their Taser policy. So, as far as I understand it, I may get a step wrong here or two, but whenever we have a Taser incident, whether that's a display or a discharge, the very first thing that's going to happen is you're going to have a sergeant involved at the scene, and they are going to do their use of force report. Then both Lieutenant Searles and I will get an email from either the sergeant or the officer that used the Taser, just letting our group know, hey, this is the incident that happened, here's the case number, and we can review the reports and just kind of get an awareness. So we're constantly training, we're getting training updates and all those sorts of things. Once that happens, the video is immediately downloaded, same day. It's downloaded by a sergeant, and it's made available to not only Lieutenant Searles, but also the in-house video team that we have here. And it's redacted, and it's prepared for review by our Citizens Police Review Board.
Okay.
So they will review it, in addition to our own department reviewing it, both for policy issues, but also for just making sure that we're appropriately using the Taser. So it seems like a lot of oversight, but I think it's appropriate and it's a good thing. We've done well so far to, I think, be appropriate in our use of the Taser, and I hope that we continue to be. So far, so good. We've been very fortunate that we haven't had any injuries, we haven't had any policy violations. I think the group of people that are carrying the Tasers now understand that this is a big responsibility, and they want to do it right. They don't want to mess it up. They don't want to hurt people, especially having been exposed to it. You don't want to use that unless you have to. But in the one instance that we did, I think it was absolutely appropriate, and it was good to see that, yes, this is why we intended to get this. This is why we have these, and it was effective. And it's not just the afterwards that we have to make sure that we're reviewing everything, but even in the moment, there are certain things where we can't use it. If someone's at the top of a flight of stairs, you're not going to tase them and let them fall because they can't defend themselves. So there's other people that shouldn't be pregnant women and the elderly and children. We can't use tasers on children. So it's very tightly restricted in when we're able to use these, but that's a good thing.
We have to know that that person is either pregnant or sometimes some of these kids look grown. My 17-year-old son looked like a grown man. I was if I didn't know him, I would think he's 25.
I think the way the policy says, like the obvious juveniles, so 8-year-olds. But every officer is responsible for their use of force, and they have to be able to articulate why they do what they did. That's what we do with everything. So that's their burden.
The review, we do a lot of review, but the review also aids us in improving. Even if we did everything right, what could we have done a little bit better? How can we make this a smoother transition, or expand or decrease the use? So it's review is always good. I mean, people, I've heard people back a little while ago was like, oh, the police always, they trying to conceal everything, and actually we don't. We're everything is being reviewed and everything is being looked at. It's just, the media doesn't need to know everything. That's the media doesn't tell us everything. They tell us what they want us to see. So we're constantly in the Urbana Police Department, constantly trying to improve, trying to get better at everything that we do, from the smallest things to the biggest things. With that being said, and I know we're going a little long today, but this is some great information that you're giving us. As far as our police, we go through a lot of stressful situations, and with our numbers and things, calls that we have to go through, officers being injured and not being able to help on the street, but we still count on the roll. So that means we got less people out there that's actually able to answer calls.
Right.
That's a lot of stress. I mean, this job alone is a lot of stress. I mean, you go out there, you know that there's a chance that you may not come home. You want to come home.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I mean, this is not World War II, but the likelihood of something happening is higher than it's ever been right now, right? So, do we have something that aids our officers emotionally, mentally, to help us keep going? I believe you run something or a part of something that helps us?
Yes. This past summer, my wife and I founded an organization. It's called the Police Support Association.
Okay.
The whole goal behind the organization is to assist police officers and their families in improving the quality of life for them, both personally and professionally.
Absolutely.
Much of that is grounded in the officer support arena, but we're also looking into doing things in the outreach arena. So, and the association's membership includes people who are police officers, their family, retirees, but also community members, people who are invested in that mission. So, the events that we've done some social events for officers. We've done some things where we've helped officers who are in need, or their family members who are in the hospital, things like that.
Right.
Just this past Monday, we had an event at the Salvation Army where members of the association were there helping out. So in the outreach arena. Not only just supporting officers and trying to improve their quality of life, but also trying to, at this local level, at Champaign County, try to build a relationship of trust between community members and police.
Yes.
And so, humanizing everybody, that's kind of the goal, is we know that there's a lot of national narratives out there that people, and we talked a little bit about that with the national media and all of that. That's fine. Let the national news take care of itself, but think locally.
Right.
You know, and that's a narrative that we hear sometimes around here is, what's going on here?
Absolutely.
And so we're trying, one of the things we're trying to do in the organization is try to get people to see police officers as people and get police officers to see people as well.
Absolutely.
And we think that over time we can build that relationship up. So that's one of the things we're trying to do.
Yeah, as officers, we need we need a way to decompress,
Yes.
right? Because we deal with so much. You know, I served in the United States Army. I've worked for 2 different police departments out in Wichita, Kansas, where there was a drive-by every day. You know, I mean, it was somebody didn't get hit every day, thank God, but somebody's property or something got hit every day out there. And then I come here and I have my first situation where there was a murder right behind me. You know,
That's right.
Several years ago, and that, you know, it sticks with you if we don't have that support. If you know, the community's beating on us, you know, they don't call us when they want to have a barbecue.
Right.
They call us, you know, when it's the worst day of their life, right? So the tools that we use, you know, we talked about tasers a lot. We talked about the baton. We talked about the weapon. You know, but our emotional and mental tools that we have. That, you know, the reason why we're here, we want to help. Matt, I want to thank you for coming on Cops Corner, and thank you for the support service that you do. Because if we as officers are mentally, physically, and emotionally healthy, we can put that off onto our citizens to try to make our community healthy. You know what I mean? It's we can't, if we're not, we can't help you, right? With all that said, I want to thank everyone for watching this edition of Cops Corner. If you have any questions about anything Sergeant Rivers covered today, or if you have any other questions about anything that you think needs to be covered by Cops Corner, email me at this email here below. Or if you have questions directly for Sergeant Rivers, you can email him at this email below. As always, thank you for watching, and God bless.